So I suggest that we, I move that Councillor Coates takes the chair in the absence of Alderman Zuko. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Those carried.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor.
In the absence of Sexton?
Yes.
Who are we covering?
Councillor Coates.
Okay. Councillor Coates.
Not covering me as a member of the committee, but...
On the chair, on the committee.
I've got Burnett, no Sexton, Thomas and Coates.
That's right.
Yes.
So we need to co-opt too.
Okay.
Move that we co-opt.
So we have a way...
And Councillor Harvey.
We received notification of absence from Alderman Zuko and Alderman Sexton. So I'll now move that we co-opt. I think the Deputy Lord Mayor beat me to it. We co-opt the Mayor and Councillor... Yep.
I might have to leave early though, but anyway.
Councillor Harvey. Okay, so moved. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone against? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've always been tempted as well.
Confirmation of minutes. Can I have a mover of the minutes of the 16th of November? So moved, Alderman Thomas. We don't need a second minutes, do we? No. Anyone against? No. Items carried. Consideration of supplementary items. There are no supplementary items. Indications.
Councillor Data on the screen.
Yes, but I think we only need to co-opt two. Yeah.
Yep.
So we've co-opted the Mayor and Councillor Harvey. Yep. And Councillor Data is present for the meeting. Indications of pecuniary and conflict of interest. Does any elected member have a declaration of pecuniary or conflict of interest they wish to declare? No. That being the case, transfer of agenda items. Does anyone wish to transfer an agenda item? No. That being the case, I'll move on to reports. So, report 6.1, which is a council policy manual review. I'll just ask the director to give an overview.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you may have read in the report, this particular tranche of policies that comes before you concludes the 2-year review cycle, which committee had previously asked for. The overall report has been prepared by Mr. Jackson, but as you would appreciate, many staff have had input into the different policies that are before you. Look, the report neatly summarises the position. It does highlight some particular policies and what has or has not happened, just so elected members are fully across that. For example, there's still an issue to be resolved with regard to elected members' development and support policy around legal expenses, and we'll be coming back to you with a separate report around that. And additionally, the leases for not-for-profit organisations will also intend to come back to you on that one more formally in the new year. As you're aware, there's been considerable interest in that policy and what Council's position should be, so we'll be undertaking some further work on that. And again, noting the report notes that both the community engagement policy and the planning appeals policy have had some more significant changes made to them. The dog management policy is no longer required because really it is now completely captured through the legislative process. And we have had to offer up a new policy for the aquatic centre around lane space usage. That's because it's a hotly contested piece of territory, and the staff do need some fallback when they're choosing what order to let groups have access to lane space in the pool. So there are about, I think there's about 28 policies or thereabouts, Chair, that have come up for your consideration. They were considered by ELT last week and there were no amendments made from the ELT process. So really, we're quite happy to take questions on individual changes if elected members have any. I have a number of staff in the room that I hope means that we can answer any questions that come forward tonight, Chair. Otherwise, of course, we'll take them on notice depending on what they are.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Short, for that introduction. I wonder if this is often the only time that we get to really discuss issues that might come out of policies or whatever. So, is it okay to do this by exception as we go, and also raise any other questions that we might have? Okay. All right. Thank you. Can I go ahead then? Just in relation to landlord consent advertising event promotional signage. So it's been raised with me on a number of occasions, just in relation to political advertising on sports fields.
Yes.
And by sporting clubs. I know there might be leases, and in sports clubs there's often political advertising, and I know that this policy, having read it, is silent. What would we need to do to introduce that?
Through you, Chair. Mr Jackson, is the amendment that is in here, was that partially to deal with this issue? Because I know we did have at the last state election, there was a question raised about political advertising at a sports ground and whether it was just a sponsorship from a state parliamentarian, or was it political advertising? Are you across that one, Paul?
Look, I'm not. Not in great detail. I guess the only thing I would say there is that there is the separate policy. The council does have a policy around election signage that obviously deals with election signage, which I take it, is not the issue that you're raising. So I guess it's sort of the non-election signage seems to be the issue that you're raising.
Yes, it is. Yeah, because it's permanently up there on the hockey centre at South Hobart, and I just feel that that's something that we should be addressing.
Through you, Chair, I note that the amendment that has been made here, in the case of applications for sponsorship signage for sporting clubs or associations at sports grounds, approval may be granted for a period of no greater than 12 months on the condition the signage is not subject to the requirement of a development application. So the approval of such signage and the nature of signage will be at the discretion of the Director's City Amenity. So I think that would deal with the issue of whether the sign stays up permanently, because this is now clearly saying it can't be up for longer than 12 months. And I understand that was one of the issues that was raised previously, that an elected member was sponsoring a club and therefore had their signage up at the sports ground, and that happened to coincide with an election period. Now, only allowing that sign to be up for 12 months may not solve that issue of that sign being up at any given time if there's an election on.
Can we actually just say what sort of signage we don't think it's appropriate? For example, I've had a representation from Andrew Wilkie about gambling signage at sporting grounds, and I don't know what we think about alcohol. Whether we have, obviously sport and alcohol, or tobacco, for example. I mean, maybe we need to actually
Spell that out, yeah.
Spell it out, the erection of signage. It says erection of signage not related to the use of the facility is not permitted. It's a rather strange way to, what does that mean? I wouldn't know what not related to the use of the facility is not permitted.
Chair, through you, the answer to the question is yes, absolutely, council. If you want to have more detail in the policy, then yes, we can do that, and we can therefore not endorse these amendments, and you can ask the staff to take it away and do some further work based on the conversation here.
I think we could just add that we do not allow political gambling, or gambling advertising.
Or tobacco. I mean, tobacco is a bit. No one does tobacco anymore.
Outlawed anyway, to be honest.
Is it?
Yeah, it's not for decades now.
Sometimes that doesn't filter down to little local sporting clubs, but I don't think tobacco's a big problem anyway.
Yeah. My question to the director might be, for example, we own Hobart. We own a sports ground, but a club leases it, and that club is sponsored.
Yes.
And then they put up a signage.
Yes.
Yeah, how does that relationship work with the lease of that? Because all of a sudden you've got a club that's potentially had a long-standing relationship and been sponsored by. Does that mean?
Well, that's it.
Maybe if I could jump in. Look, I think look, the situation through you, Chair, with a lot of our sports grounds is that the ground itself is not leased. So the facilities surrounding the sports ground might be, so the club rooms, facility that sits adjacent to the ground itself is often leased by a sporting club. So I guess, council has a lease agreement in place, so, the terms of the lease would dictate what is and isn't allowed in terms of signage and things like that. I think I would probably, if I could be so bold as to suggest some caution with amending it here without sort of having it come back, only because sort of having been involved in a lot of these organisations, the economics of those organisations quite often can depend on arrangements and relationships that they have with sponsors and other supporters. Now, that's not to say that council isn't able to change it, but at least council can be fully informed of the consequences of a decision around that. So I think if committee rather was minded to look at that, I guess my suggestion would be perhaps to defer this policy, noting the comments that have been made and bring it back.
But can we defer to investigate potentially the issues around advertising, gambling and alcohol? Politicals, yeah. Political could be discriminatory, but that could be looked into.
Yeah, I think we need, and again,
But if it is on alcohol, I think it's really important that it comes back and goes to that particular policy would need to go to full council, because just the word cascade, they bring out, they have soft drinks, they have all sorts of different companies have non-alcoholic wines, and yet they, it might be Gießen, I'm not using an example, so they've got to be really careful. And your point, Paul, in relation to the sponsorship, I mean, it's just something we should consider, but it should come back to full council.
Sponsors can always have their signage inside club rooms and stuff. I mean, I guess what we're doing is just trying to keep the public facing areas a bit less.
And I think it's going to come back to be considered, but there's nothing out in the general community at the present time that forbids advertising of wine and beer, and that's simple as that. So it's come up once before, but some years ago.
Anecdotal, I know, but like a lot of sports.
On TV, I think.
Yeah.
Advertise alcohol on TV, I think, can you?
Well, I think we
think so,
considered it
yeah.
a long time ago.
We did.
Yeah.
Maybe it's after before certain times or something.
I don't know. Like kids programming. Yeah.
and through you, Chair, if we think about gambling, are you referring to the activity of gambling or a business that might have gambling as part of its overall business interest?
Like
The letter from Wilkie was not specific. It just said constituents complained about gambling advertising being in City of Hobart parks.
Something that should be considered.
Yep.
So if we can defer that,
Yep.
Chair.
Look,
For those.
anecdotal, I know, but I know a lot of sports clubs have a home venue. So Sandy Bay Cricket Club, for instance, they'll have their celebration drinks or whatever the syntax, but other clubs might go to venues where there is drinking or gambling or whatever happens. But yeah, I don't know it's an issue.
Look, I think we've heard that discussion, so we'll do some further work on that policy and bring it back, Chair, at the next available opportunity.
So
In relation to the next policy, so it's Mount Wellington Observation Shelter. I know there's no many changes. Do we add Kununyi to that, or is it just known as Mount Wellington Observation Shelter? Can we just make that simple change?
Highly appropriate.
It was a revelation to me that you were able to hire that observation hut after hours.
I had the Dark Mofo dance party up there.
Can I keep going? If there's any more.
Councillor Dudder, you haven't. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me here.
He's good.
Good. Yep.
In relation to the no spray register at Appendix 5, and I've just wondered, given that this is fairly new practice in relation to the orange markers, and also there's quite a lot of information about the Section 26 responsibilities, like roles and responsibilities of ratepayers who might want to opt out to keep their place weed free. I've just wondered if there's much advertising or if there's been anything in the Hobart, like Capital City News or Hobart Observer, in relation to this, because I think it's quite, you know, like you see the orange markers around, and I know, Lord Mayor, you talked on the radio about the orange markers for the no spray. I'm just wondering if we can sort of raise awareness of responsibilities and give these few people that chance to opt out. So it's no sort of change to the no amendment, but if that can be taken on board.
Absolutely. Do you want us to take that as a question without notice, Deputy, and provide a formal response?
Not really.
Oh, all right.
I trust you.
Okay.
Get on. If that's all right, it's not taking too many resources away.
Just checking.
In relation to Appendix 7, the public open space contributions, and it's really a question to Mr. Noy, will the public open space contributions, will there be any changes, through you, Chair, in relation to the Tasmanian planning scheme?
Yes, through you, Chair. That's is managed through Logbum, and it's a legislative requirement. It's unlikely that there'll be any changes to that 5% contribution by way of subdivision. However, we have alluded to requiring contributions through other means to assist in the funding of open space provision as well as infrastructure improvements as part of the Central Hobart Precincts Plan. So we'll come back with a suite of options for the elected members to consider, whether it's or promote through a legislative change with the state government. So both of those options are on the table.
Thank you. And I'm presuming this change, this amendment, so that the land valuation is calculated on a date which is not more than 1 year prior to the date of the sealing of the final plan. That means it's a more accurate reflection of the value.
Yeah, that's correct. Just to avoid any uncertainties.
Keep going.
I'll give everyone else a chance first in case they want to.
Oh no.
No, Deputy?
Okay. Just in relation to community engagement, Appendix 11, and this comes up quite a lot at our Access Advisory Committee about what is accessible, you know, and so I'm presuming that all of our activities in relation to community engagement and web access is all accessible for visually impaired and people with disabilities?
Through you, Chair. I'm not going to say it's 100% perfect. I think one of the issues we have with web access is it's the document, so the actual web page content is usually fine. There's a particular program where it translates to voice, but it's when we then upload an attachment where we can fall into difficulties of whether, I just can't think of the term, but the access reader, whether it can pick up the text in the document. So we are actively working through that issue at the moment. That's certainly been drawn to my attention by the communications team and also Megan Cunningham.
Yeah, great, thank you. Just in relation to the next one, which is the Doon Kennedy hosting of major events at the Doon Kennedy Hobart Aquatic Centre. Is that in response to concerns by Swimming Tasmania and some of those large events, accessibility and cost?
Through you, Chair, the changes to this have been largely on the basis that the previous policy was, its wording was considerably out of date. So we've tried to make it, I guess, be more contemporary in its language and try and make it more understandable. So no, it's not been in response to any particular issue from that point of view. It's trying to make the policy more user-friendly and also to provide more guidance to the management team at the centre.
Yes, so Appendix 16, which is one from Ms. McDonnell, the rate exemption charitable purposes. I know that we have obviously an arrangement with UTAS as a rates equivalent. Do we ever contact those organisations who fit under this category as to whether they're interested in a rates equivalent arrangement?
The charter rates exemption is statutory, so all charities that are entitled to that are granted, and it's reviewed annually to ensure they have continued eligibility. In relation to rates equivalency, no. So we've only ever entered that heads of agreement with the university for that specific purpose.
Do you think, through you, Chair, do you think there's any harm in asking whether that sort of rates equivalent might be possible?
There's no harm in asking, but these organisations tend to be charities who have, I guess, less capacity to pay rates than perhaps other organisations. So, in terms of providing the rebate, it's only for the general rate that we provide the rebate at this stage.
I think that they're, like with the university example, we're looking at improving the public realm, and that could be of benefit to, some independent living unit, for example, to improve the streetscape around their property, so which would have an
Bus
ongoing
stop or
effect.
something, bus shelter.
Yeah, bus shelters or whatever. Yeah, so perhaps we could, I don't know if there's an amendment to make to this or something that could be considered.
Although, because this is all tied up with the state government trying to fix this independent living units problem, and I think does anyone know where they're up to with that? Because I think we reached a compromise with them, a grandfathering piece, like when the exemption would be over and we'd be able to charge rates again to those venues. But do you know what the latest is with that?
I don't have, the update that I had was that the matter is being considered by, through LGAT with the state government. I haven't got a recent update, but it was still, I actually spoke to LGAT about the matter about 2 to 3 weeks ago, and it was still in train, so we're still considering.
It still hasn't been drafted. The legislation amendment hasn't been drafted.
That's correct.
Well, in that case, it could still be a while before we. And some of the agencies are quite large, like Southern Cross Care and.
Yeah, and it's not just ILUs, is it? I mean, it's other charities. Might be. I don't know whether there's any harm in asking or any purpose in asking, but I think if they could see the benefits.
What would we, other than for some feeling of warmth and gesture, they're a charity. The law treats them as a charity. I'm just trying to find a reason why a charity would recommend to its board that it pays rates. I mean, the uni's a different example. I think they're a huge organisation, one of the biggest employers and one of the most financial in the state. But if I look at Salvation Army and a whole range of them, you would actually be ripping out some of their really important funds that they use for a lot of social. That's why they're charities, and so I wouldn't vote for it. But I couldn't see the reason why they do it. I mean, the council's not necessarily the most favoured beast in the state, and it charges rates and all sorts of things. Anyway, I appreciate we do good works, but this is their status at the moment. You try, but I'd want an incentive. If I was a charity, I'd want an incentive for even. I mean, if I was a CEO of a charity, I'd find it hard to take to my board.
But I think what the deputy's suggesting is it would be on the basis of a voluntary contribution.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I appreciate what
And
it
it could
is.
be a bus shelter, which would benefit, you know,
But
people.
they'd probably say, you know, we're a charity, we need a bus shelter, and presumably you're going to provide it in the
Well,
right
I don't
space.
know, I wouldn't second guess what they're thinking, really.
Well, I'm not second guessing their thought, and if you can find me a charity that's prepared to put a whole heap of money out for no reason, I won't be supporting that charity in the future.
I think, to have a discussion, but I think this policy is a good policy, almost outside of, because this explains what kind of groups are, who's eligible, etc. I think a lot of this is driven by the legal definition, which we have to follow. Outside of this policy, it almost might be something for economic development to say, look, are there instances where there are projects that say it is doing up the streetscape outside a business or something, or say it's doing, Hobart City Mission have recently moved, and we might say, look, we want to do some work out front here to make it easier for your people, but you know, rather than just being a ratepayers pay for it, are you happy to enter into a rates equivalency agreement so that it's part funded by that, you know, if that makes sense, maybe as an option, but yeah.
We could work is if we weren't going to, if we programmed general maintenance or street improvement works, but we couldn't do it for 3 years. We said to them, we can do it in the next 6 months, but we want something to advance that that improvement works.
Chair, through you, my comment was going to be, it would, yeah, we need to be mindful of Council's own capital works program and the priorities that we'd already established for that as well.
Well, perhaps it's something, you know, as you say, Chair, that we could just refer to, like, leave this as it is, but refer the concept to, economic development for further consideration.
Sure.
I'm happy with that, Chair, if that's the will of the meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
And the Appendix 18 rates remissions, it's, is it only for pensioners, and will we just call it pensioners rate remissions?
Through you, Chair, this policy does pertain to pensioners, yes, and it's not just aged pensioners, it's anybody that is in receipt of the pensioner concession.
Okay, well, this is an area that I think does deserve review. We've got a huge we've got a percentage of ratepayers in this city that are now survivors of a couple. One's died, obviously, for me to make that statement. But they're living in their own homes, and we have social policies which living in place, living in the area you lived in. But our rates, we give a paucity here. We give something like 1% or 2% off the, there's an amount of something like $430, $450, from which we give the balance between what the state government gives in another realm, and in our case, I think in many cases it works out at $10 or $20 a year. It's $10 a year, and that's an indictment on how we're treating our pensioners and our people who are on any pension. And I just think this has been a glaring problem in our city for years, and it's made people, and I've had examples, made people move from our city to an outlying city because they couldn't afford to stay here, but they had their family, their circle, their services, facilities all around them, and they had to move out because our rates was what was crippling them. And the land valuation going up, they haven't got a salary, they've retired, and we give them $10. I mean, it's a wonder it hasn't been front page sometime over the last few years. And I think if we could review it, I really think there's some great advantages, even if we're balancing social need against the actual costs that we're foregoing or abating in terms of rates. It's something that's been sticking in my claw for a number of years, and yet it just gets passed by. So
why do they only get $10?
That's all it is. It's $10 a year.
Oh, so how are the state government funded?
No, that's the state government gives a certain amount against other costs that they have, up to a maximum of $430 or $450. But when you take out something like water charge, there's not water charges. It's a state government charge that we all have. Well, they might get like $410 off their land tax. So there's only a gap between that and the maximum, and that's where the $10 comes in.
Director, just want to...
Chair, so there is significant history to this matter. So clearly, under the Local Government Rates Remissions Act, so we are required to offer 20% off rates and charge, 30% off rates and charges to eligible pensioners. But it is, you're quite right, Alderman Thomas, it is capped, and that cap is dictated by the state government from year to year, and it's 20% off the fire service levy, again, with a cap, and that's dictated by the state government. Some years ago, this council made a decision. In addition, there was a representation made by the Independent Retirees Association, who may not have been eligible for these rebates. And at that time, this dates back to the mid-90s, council made the decision to offer a further $10 remission, which picked up independent retirees as well. The decision was made and it was not indexed. It has been reviewed, I think, by council at least once since then, yes. And again, no decision was made to index that payment. We are the only council in Tasmania to offer an additional pensioner remission. No other council does.
No, but that's not really for pensioners. That's for pensioners and others, the $10.
Well, yes. The argument was the independent retirees were worse off.
But the pensioners do get 30% off their rates.
30% and 20% off the fire levy as well, and that's the state.
That's good.
The state
The
does.
state pays for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's still a ludicrously low figure because it's capped. I mean, I'd be happy for this one to be kept out until I could make a proper argument.
Is that for
there's figures
pensioners
here
though,
that don't, the figures, it sounds great, 30 and 20, but when you look at it, it's negligible.
Chair, through you, I don't think council has the unilateral ability to change
No,
those.
we
I
don't
think
have the ability to change that.
It's a
but we
legat
could.
type situation if council was of the view that the amounts
But
were
the
not.
council could independently, through the chair, could independently make its own policy in relation to that particular part of our rates policy. And there would be significant social benefit here that would well and truly justify any loss of income. And I mean, but it needs a proper paper for it.
But we might also say we're better off, funding that extra money into senior services, like minibuses or
Potentially, but I mean at this stage it's a hit, particularly for a large number of people who have lost their partners, and they're the only one living in this house. And one would say, well, you should sell up, but it's not as easy as that.
No, and they're going to get there's going to be a big boost next year, isn't there? Yeah.
Debbie?
So I'll just maybe through you to Ms McDonnell. So what would be the average? Because we're talking about 30%, 20%, then maximum level plus $10. Can you just explain how much that might be as an average figure?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. It can be around it depends on the value of the property. The 30% off of rates is capped by the state government, and that amount goes up. It's indexed every year, so it goes up about $6 or $7 every year. If you're not a customer of Taswater, it's an additional amount. And off the top of my head, I think the amounts are roughly about $350 or $60, and in the 400s if you're not a customer of Taswater. Then you also get 20% off the fire service rate, which is uncapped. So the higher your AAV on your property, the more you get in terms of a discount off of that. And then in addition, council gives $10 to every pensioner, including those that are not eligible for the state government pensioner remission. So totaling that, it can be in the $500, but it does vary according to the property value. So if you've got a high property value, you'll get more. If you've got a lower property value, you'll get slightly less. So that's the current values, and we currently have about 3,000 pensioners, pensioner ratepayers in the municipal area.
Okay, so So how much does that add up to that we?
So we budget for, well, we budget as a council $30,000 a year for the R component of the pensioner remission. And as Mr. Short said, we're the only council in the state that offers anything other than the state government pensioner remission scheme.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, you know, like there could be other ways like aquatic, you know, things that benefit the community.
Totally
Or
appreciate
benefit
it.
our services.
Totally
whatever we do.
appreciate it, but
Yeah.
if I could suggest that we get a paper on what we can do. It doesn't have to be out of this meeting, come up as a motion if we have to, but I think your idea is sound, but we do need to look at what we're actually giving, providing and receiving.
Is it a bit broader than just pensioners though? Is it almost around people living below the poverty line? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a very appropriate time for us to be doing a review, and I'd be delighted to explore it with you.
Some would say we need to look at how we can appropriately look at rates for generation millennial who are struggling in the housing market.
So can we take that offline as well to have like just.
It's policy then, is it? Or
Well, can I the policy is unamended as it's presented, so can I suggest that for the policy remains in place, but we will do a research piece to come back to a finance committee with some thinking around this.
on sort of pension and social security
Special assistance.
assistance in
Proper
a couple
rates.
of other
Yeah.
in a couple of other cities. I know, for example, in the city of Sydney, but they've got so much money from developer contributions that they're allowed to collect because of the state government allowing them to. That pensions don't pay rates in Sydney. They don't pay anything.
I think,
But you know,
I
that's
think
the
a modern rates, just
difference.
taking on board the Lord Mayor's comments in relation to services and facilities and other ways we can assist. But I think it'd be better if we, with the committee's okay, we actually had a scope given to us before you do it.
I think that's right. Maybe it's a part one. We'll come back to committee with the
It
scope.
probably goes to KEC probably, or economic development.
So that's eligible pensioners in Sydney, not every pensioner. So you've still got to be eligible.
Which means you're on the government pension. You're not an independent retiree. I think is what eligible pensioner means. But still, would be quite a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
So through you, Chair, if committee's happy, I would prefer to come back to committee with a scope because it's potentially a very wide report. I would like to have committee's endorsement around the scope before we went too far on this one.
Yep.
The policy on the books, Appendix 18, everything except for $10 is essentially enacting the Act.
Yes. Yep. That is correct.
Cool.
Do you mind if we talk about public question time? Because I have to go at. It might not take very long, but I think it's quite an important one. It's in the meeting procedures.
Which one? 22.
Three questions in a maximum period.
Got on 18.
Yeah,
Deputy
some
Mayor,
change.
between now and 22, was there any others?
Just the one before, which was travel, and I think we need to, for elected members, development and support. And I think we just need to recognise that e-vehicles might need to come into the travel. Yes.
So just what added in as e-vehicles?
Yes. Well, e-vehicles need to be remunerated. Is there any problem through the Local Government Act or?
Through you, Chair, not that I'm aware of. I think under the Act, reimbursement for travel, so whether that's the mode doesn't come into it, the Act's not that specific. So.
Yes. All right. Well, it probably needs to reflect that. I don't know if it needs to be deferred, but.
That would be reimbursement for electricity used to charge electric vehicles. Which would be pretty
Well, the
insignificant.
problem is it's within our own facility, but I think the staff can work out it's more, because it might be too much effort to work out how much. It's a bit like trying to charge us for our mobile phone charging, but I think the...
I
Sorry,
think what
Chair.
we've heard is the legal advice, which is that it's covered under the Act, so the policy should probably be written to reflect what's in the Act.
Let's say in that, isn't there a list of the types of travel?
There may be some technical issues. I mean, you're quite right there about how do you actually meter that or cost it. But Mr. Jackson is also trying to say something.
Oh, look, I guess through your chair, I perhaps wasn't going to the extent of actually attributing the cost, but just recognising that the provision of that was possible given the practical reality and most likely very minor cost associated with it. So just my sort of understanding of the Deputy's comments was that it was just recognising that making provision for e-vehicles was sufficient. So perhaps if that was moved in as amendment
Yes.
through this, then we can finesse the wording of the policy.
Yep, I'll move that then.
Amendment to, what is it, Appendix 21, to include EV vehicles.
E-vehicles.
EV.
Yep. That might be bikes as well.
If we're going on to the public question time, can I make a suggestion?
Do I need to put that amendment?
I think it's just taken.
It's all in,
Happy?
all
Yep.
in one, probably.
Oh, yep.
I'm finding it increasingly frustrating when the same individual, mainly, or individuals come up and ask a question, a long question that takes our staff a day or more to answer, which is sitting in the annual report. And I think, I don't know whether or not we need to put it, but I think that the Lord Mayor, as chairman of the meeting, is entitled to respond. It's in the annual report, stupid, because it really does. It does absolutely. It's done for whatever reason and maybe legitimate, maybe not.
So, point of order, Deputy.
Point of order is, I think Alderman Thomas should probably withdraw that comment to a member of public.
I didn't identify any particular members or member of the public at all. So, I mean, I would not have ever, I don't even, there's several people come with the same long questions, and I genuinely believe, I will retract the word stupid, but it wasn't referring to any particular person at all, and I categorically state that. But what I do believe is that it's implicit on this council to relieve the staff from having to answer laboriously questions which are the answers for which are found in our annual report.
So I think, Alderman Thomas, we could potentially mention that in this policy, because at the moment there's an amendment here which is, I think, saying Council will attempt to answer questions at the meeting that they are asked. However, questions may be taken on notice where there is insufficient notice is provided, or the content of the question is complex or requires research to be undertaken. Maybe we need to add in there something around.
What is it? Which policy is it? 22.
Or maybe
That's something like in the event that
847.
Paul could massage it, but in the event that the subject matter is adequately and fully covered in the annual report or annual reports, then the questioner is referred back to the annual report.
a range of reports where the material can be found.
Electronically.
Yeah.
We say it's in the annual report. The legitimate question, not knocking the question, or legitimate question, here's the annual report, and they referred to it.
Something like, where possible, questioners will be referred to existing council reports, including the annual report.
Perhaps through you, Chair, if I can just interject momentarily. Under the meeting procedure regs, the chairperson of the council meeting does have discretion to accept or not accept a question. Now, that's an unfettered power, so there's no limits on that power. The only caveat is if a question is not accepted, a reason has to be provided. So I guess, generally speaking, I've resisted the urge to come up with a whole range of reasons why we wouldn't accept a question and then fetter the chairperson's discretion. However, I mean, you would note there that there is a dot point in there already, which sort of acknowledges, without limiting the power, we're not going to, or proposing in the policy that we wouldn't accept a question where, in the reasonable opinion of the chairperson, you're just proffering an opinion rather than actually asking a question.
Well, maybe we need to articulate.
But maybe we can include that in
I
there.
actually would never, I wasn't proposing that you wouldn't, Lord Mayor, I wasn't proposing you wouldn't accept the question. I'd just say that in your answer, even to questions that you received, if you've had time to consider, if the advice to you is that it's in the annual report, that's the answer they get. That you always accept a question, because that would be impolite. But certainly the response is not what's taking the time it is at the moment, is regurgitating the annual report.
Yeah. So we could add that into the long amendment here at the top, something like, where possible, questioners will be referred to information.
We're applicable because
so existing council publications and reports. Okay. The other one I was going to say is, I think a period of up to 15 minutes should be provided, which is what we're required to do, and I don't know why we'd extend it to up to 30 minutes. I think 15 is fine, and I also wondered whether we should suggest that it's at the end of the meeting.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Because if you're really keen, why not sort of come and listen and then ask a question at the end?
Yeah, through you, Chair. No
So
reason.
we could
I think that's purely at the discretion of the chair.
Well, it's the...
I'd rather put it in here.
Yes, that's what I mean,
It's
yes.
the GM's prerogative to construct an agenda for the council, and I think it talks about the most logical, grouping things appropriately and all those sorts of things. So absolutely, if council wants to have a policy that gets done at the end, I don't see any reason.
Completely within your power to do that.
Yeah.
Well, but would it be? Well, I don't mind, but I think we can put. I would suggest 15, not 30. But then the question is, do you want to also say in this document when we put it, or?
Can do it through you, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. If that's the will of the
I wonder if
committee.
that might, all of a sudden a member of the community has indicated they're going to come and ask a question, someone gets up and says, oh, we transfer the agenda. I know it's written in our policy, we have it at the end.
The difficulty, whilst I'm very sympathetic to what you're asking, I think the fact that it's a provision or an entitlement under the Act, and people know with certainty they can come along at 5 o'clock or whatever and ask, whereas what we're suggesting could mean that somebody would say, I couldn't be here for the whole meeting, I just wanted to ask this question.
And they're
I
genuine.
have no idea when it's going to come up, and it's way at 9 o'clock at night. So I think we'd probably, whilst it's tempting, I think the idea would be to leave it where it is.
Okay. For now.
It's tempting to put it at the end, though. Yeah.
But Mr. Jackson, each agenda, like if the agenda was relatively short, there's no reason why they couldn't put it on the agenda at the end.
It's not always the case.
I know.
Hey, one item can make it a long meeting.
Yeah, in an election year, we could end up with multiple candidates. But if we've only got the 15 minutes, then it's sort of.
Through the chair, 15 minutes is great, but what if we have a series of, say for example in the chamber here tonight, there are all these people with a question, and they've all got, how long have they got to put their questions?
They've got 1 minute.
And they can have 3 questions.
Well, I'm suggesting they get 2.
I'm suggesting they get 1.
So if we've got a group, so we have, it's getting closer to next October, there's a group of 8 people, that's going to take it over the 15. So you either got a discretion to move it on, or you say we're the first 6 in, or the first 5 in.
And then they come back 2 weeks later. I mean, none of them are. None of them are sort of.
Can I just clarify?
Or if someone alerts me to a really genuine urgent one, it does. I think it's my discretion as to the order of them. So you can.
Yeah, Paul. I'm just looking at page 171 of the agenda. Public question time. If there are a number of persons wishing to ask questions, the chairman may take the questions in such order so as to hear as many members of the public as practical during the time allocated.
I think you might be on the wrong page, which I think is entirely our fault, and I hadn't mentioned it because I wasn't sure if it was going to be identified or not. I wasn't going to confuse things unnecessarily.
Into a typo.
Look at page 155. For some reason, and I'm not sure, I only sort of discovered it as I was going through the papers before the meeting, we've attached the previous version of the policy, which was amended in August 2020 for some reason, and I couldn't work out why we'd done that, so I'm sort of putting it down to a mistake. So page 155's the...
Thank you for that clarification.
So sorry for that.
Can we also say that it's 60 seconds to provide background and rationale and ask the question? Because, you know, sometimes the questions are, you know, really, they're a paragraph in themselves. You know, so it just sort of, I don't know. I just think it's neater if we can just time once, you know, and go, okay, you've got 60 seconds, you know, your background and your questions. And I'd say one question per person per meeting, rather than, or two, but I don't know why, again, we'd do
Depending
three.
on the number of questions, if there's 6 people, one question each. If there's only 2 people, then maybe you can ask your second question. Can you have a format?
My fear would be if you go down the path of question, I mean, I think time is the best way to do it. My fear would be often what happens is I have a question in regards to the new Antarctic vessel. When is it arriving, and how much is the City of Hobart? Is that 2 questions? You know what I mean? Like often people will have 1 or 2, you know, if that makes sense, and then you open up a can of worms as to is that 1 question or 2 questions. You know, I think in the scope of inquiring about something, you often will have multiple questions on the subject. You know, I think if you're going to go down the path of you've got a minute, well, you've got to be very distinct. You've got to be. If that makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
That would be my view on it. I'm happy to hear any debate on the floor, but
yeah.
I mean, I think the 3 is enough number that it indicates to people you can't just ask 100. But at the same time, if you want to ask what are the opening hours for Town Hall, also I want to know the opening hours for City Hall. You know, is that 2 questions?
Sure.
So, yeah.
Okay.
So under the Act, we're obliged to do, through you, Chair, under the Act, we're obliged to have a question time at every meeting.
For 15 minutes.
At least 15 minutes.
For at least.
Yeah,
No
I
longer than
appreciate
30.
that singular can be read as a plural in legislation, vice versa, but does it say the public may ask questions, and presumably it'd be interesting to know whether or not, because you may find that issue come up, so you've got 4 people and they say, but I've got 3 questions I'm allowed to ask, and maybe we need to find out whether or not it is 1 question.
It just says you've got to provide the time. It doesn't. That's it. All it says, I think.
And a member of the public may give written notice. So under the meeting procedure regs, they've got to give us at least 7 days notice. Now, I think, and I can't recall exactly when, but a few years ago, council did relax that requirement. We sort of only require written notice by the Friday for a meeting on the Monday, because the desire was from council was to shorten that time period. I guess the practical reality of that means that we can't necessarily always answer the question, depending on on the nature of it. But it does talk about a question to be asked at that meeting, providing written notice of a question. But then
Can I? So it appears that people make up the question on the Monday and get the opportunity to ask it. Is that the case?
Without notice. That's also allowed for in the Act.
It is.
it is. Through you, Chair, there's no requirement that they have to give it to us, provide it to us.
But
in writing.
flip side is we can take it on notice and not provide a response.
And you do have the discretion, or the chairperson has the discretion to not accept it in the first place.
But if we get it on the Friday, are we obliged to have an answer on the Monday? No.
Only 7 days.
We always endeavour through you, Chair, to have an answer
Say,
ready.
But maybe we should say if you want a written. Well, if a written response is to be provided, it's too complicated.
Through you, Chair, we do
Yeah.
have an obligation to include them in the minutes of the meeting. So I think, irrespective of whether you lengthened or shortened the time period, the upshot is that we would have to provide a written response because it has to go into the minutes.
Can I just ask a question, and I just haven't read this fully, but anything that's offensive, is that covered? That it can be rejected if it's detrimental, to use a phrase by a term by used by Alderman Zuko, but if it's inflammatory towards staff or elected members, you know, like it's a personal attack or what's the word?
Inflammatory.
I think
Defamatory.
Like that guy yesterday, I should have actually rejected his because it actually wasn't to do with the business of the council, which is something I have and that's not in here.
No.
But maybe we need to kind of better, because rather than me reading two documents, maybe everyone should have the same, the bit about where I can, if it's not to do with the business of the council. I mean, but he's still got his question out, like he's still got to say it. And I could have said, you know, that's not to do with the business of the council. But yeah, I guess you can't do anything about that, really.
Through you, Chair, as I mentioned earlier, the chairperson of a council meeting may refuse to accept a question from a member of the public. That's not limited. So, for all of those reasons you mentioned, the Lord Mayor or the chairperson at the meeting would be quite entitled to disallow it. The only thing is that we have to provide a reason. So, yeah, that would obviously be the reason. I guess it's a question for committee and council as to whether they feel it's necessary to reflect that in a policy, or is it just empowering? Or
It is there?
Yeah,
right.
I think there is, because otherwise we've got the Local Government Act which says that I can do that, and there's this which is silent on it, and I think it's better for the two documents to be. That's
in the hands of the committee, I guess, around that. I mean, it's certainly not legally necessary. It's simply whether
That's
council
more
wants to have it duplicated, or I guess interpret what not necessarily directing the chairperson how to act, but I guess providing some support for the chairperson that these things are taken as read, they won't be accepted. And I've certainly seen that in some other councils' equivalent policies.
So, Mayor, confirming your wish is that this policy, Appendix 22, reflects what's written in the Local Government Act in regards to the powers of the chair to not accept the question.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't need to reflect it.
Just so I'm clear, are we talking about that because in my view that it already exists and isn't necessary to be reflected in a policy of the council? But if we're picking up the points that the Deputy Lord Mayor was making to say that in exercising,
I see.
The chairperson in exercising their powers under the meeting procedures to not accept a question, these types of things would be taken as read that they're out of order and won't
Maybe
be
we
accepted.
should, yeah.
And as I say, I've certainly seen that in some other councils who've had equivalent policies, so that would be easy to include.
Right,
How
so
do
we're
we-
coming
how do we-
back. I think we're coming back.
Well, I
Point
think,
two. Come back.
can we though just pass these ones, get these ones going now?
Well, I guess through you, Chair, is it a case that we can, we've heard what you've said. Is it a case that if that was included as an amendment, we can incorporate it into the policy without it needing to come back? Or again, I'm kind of in the hands of the committee. If you were comfortable that, I've heard what the deputy said, and sort of those sorts of things could be picked up. And as officers, I think we could certainly do that. It's just a question of whether the committee feels they need to see it again.
We would see it before the full council. This goes to full council.
So it would go to council as amended tonight.
I'm happy. Is that your hand up, Councillor Dara? I mean, it is your hand up. Are you putting it up because you wish to speak?
No. I'm listening. I'm listening, and I will make my comments when necessary. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Thanks.
I've got to go, but before I do, can I just make sure that where we have individuals will be allocated 60 seconds to provide background or rationale to introduce, and then add the words "and ask each question." And that means that for 3 questions, there's going to be 3 minutes of rationale for each question, which seems...
So 1 minute per question?
I don't think so. That seems a lot. That means you could potentially have 3 minutes of rationale.
Why don't you
No,
say
I think
1
it's-
minute per question, which includes, you don't even have to, yeah.
For all questions?
1 minute per question, which must therefore total 3 minutes.
No.
If there's 3 questions.
So that's 3 minutes of,
A maximum
Yes.
of 1 minute per question,
They've got 3 questions and they've got a minute per question.
which includes the preamble. There's no,
If my understanding is correct, and I'm confirming that we're on the same page here, but as chair of the meeting, someone gets up to ask a question, and
Yeah.
it includes a preamble, they've got a minute. And that might have, my question is, did the council, I don't know, did the council have facilities open on Sunday? Did it have facilities open on Saturday? So theoretically there's 2 questions there, but it's 1 question, 60 seconds. I then get up again and ask whatever my next one is, and that's 60 seconds, and then, yeah.
okay.
That's my understanding as I read it with the...
Okay, but it has to, the 60 seconds includes both the rationale and the actual question.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And then you can do 3 questions or 2?
I think you do here a limit of 3 questions per person per meeting, yeah. Is my reading of it.
I think it's probably a limit, you could set a limit for the convenience of the meeting, but advise that they can bring their other questions to the next meeting. Because you're never going to limit how many questions they've got, but you could say this for tonight, you can only have these.
Yeah.
Work that out.
Well, the way this policy reads, a limit of 3 per person per meeting applies. So the second they get to, if they stand up a 4th time, as under our policy, the advice is, look, you've already had 3. Next meeting's in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you. I've got to go, unfortunately.
Do we wish to come up, Councillor Dara?
oh, yes,
Temporarily left. I think he's coming back in.
Yeah, I think he just took
but the Lord Mayor's gone, so.
Can I have
got a
him
quorum.
All right, so we have to finish this item? Yeah.
Oh, we're going to
Don't
finish
need to
this.
co-op.
Ah, okay,
You've
good,
got
cool.
a quorum.
Okay, is there anything else on 22 before we move on?
No, but good discussion. Because I don't, I don't want to limit public question time, but, we're just tidying it up really to make it run a lot more effectively.
It's become, more than just question time. It's a tactic, to waste council time, I think, and to self-promote. So it's lost its function. We've got to be careful how it all operates.
It's all part of the.
I mean, I think having a minute is, you've got a minute, you can get up, you can ask your question. It doesn't really give the opportunity for them to give a big preamble, which is good. If they've got multiple things or multiple issues, they can always get up, but once they hit 3, that's it. The policy says you're not allowed anymore. So one person can never take up at 15 minutes more than, 10% of the time. So.
Well, your answer could take up.
Yeah. Dorothy Dixon. Cool. Deputy.
No, I have no other points, really, for the other.
Oh, fabulous. I've just got one question, Chair, that's all. I just wanted to ask through you to Mr. Jackson. When you approach a review, what do you... first of all, you're obviously going to record legal changes, and you're going to record a major shift in council strategy. Is that where you start? I mean, I'm just interested as a...
Look, through you, Chair, look, the detail escapes me, but we certainly go out to, through ELT, through our directors, and basically say, look, here are a bunch of policies that fall within under your umbrella, and ask that they be reviewed for all of those reasons, and I guess operational reasons, and the CAC lane usage one's probably an example of that. Yeah, look, this is a wholesale. This is the opportunity where we go back to first principles. Do we need the policy? Why do we have it? What's changed? All those sorts of things. I think that, and look, I guess, that process might change, I guess, with the transformation project and the new structure that will be in place. So, but yeah, that's historically been our approach.
Cool. So 6.1, which was the policy manual, the notes, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director, but number 2, which was the advertising at sports grounds is not going to be included in this, and that's going to be re-looked at. The one around the assistance and social security assistance and pensioners, which was number 18, the policy as is, but it's been taken on notice by the workshop. There's obviously going to be some changes to 22 which will be made, and we'll be able to see that before it goes to full council.
Just to clarify, probably not before full council, given that that agenda will go out Friday. So my interpretation of that was that if the amendments would be noted in the recommendation, that would go through council would sign off on that, and then we would simply administratively make the changes, and happy to circulate the policy once we've made those changes so that you can make sure that they accord with the intention.
Exactly what I'm doing is summing up. Cool, and yes, that was the notes I took.
You said the e-vehicles?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, sorry, and the 21 was to reflect the Act, which was the mode of transports, not so the e-vehicles, and 2021.
Also had Appendix 3, which was inserting Kunyani, which was around the use of the shelter on the mountain, and Appendix 5, which I can't remember which one it was.
That was the spraying of weeds.
Which was just promoting it, which wasn't necessarily an amendment, but we've heard you. And
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
I'm happy to move those, Chair.
Moved by the Deputy Mayor. Do I need a second for this one? Committee? No. Anyone against? No. Item's carried.
Move that we co-opt Councillor Dutta.
Councillor Dutta, are you okay to be co-opted? Yes.
It is very, very difficult to hear properly. There's so much distortion, and I can't really follow the whole meeting properly, and therefore it may not be. I don't want to be simply saying yes to things I don't hear properly.
Oh, thank you for being honest. You are not co-opted. Sorry, I'll ask the deputy to withdraw that motion. Withdraw. Cool. 6.2, Customer Service Complaints and Compliments Report. Before I pass off to the Director, I'd just like to congratulate you on what seems to be a significant drop. Would you like to give a quick overview?
Which you actually might hand over either to Mr. Jackson or Ms. Holland is also in the room. If either of you want to give the overview, because you've been responsible for compiling the report, but certainly organisationally wide, it is very pleasing, albeit we're seeing a change or a shift in the type of complaint.
Absolutely. Look, and I think the other thing through your chair to point out is that we've historically been coming off a fairly low base when it comes to being the way we've captured and dealt with our complaints and things like that, and that's only improving. We're continuing to get more sophisticated in capturing those, and we'll continue to do so. We've got the rollout of a new customer request system sort of imminent with a few sections of the organisation, and then as a precursor to going more broadly. So I think certainly talking to the CEO around this, that this is really a the beginning of the analysis and data and so forth that we'll be able to collect around this sort of stuff, so that going forward we'll be able to provide much better information and better data to the council around I guess our performance in the eyes of the community.
Opening up in discussion, Councillor Harvey.
77 complaints from 77 people. Do we have any other data? Is it 77 complaints from less than 77 people?
Director or through you, Mr. Jackson?
Through you, Chair, I'm looking at Ms. Holland. She's nodding. So.
I'm wondering if there's like one person who's complained 77 times.
No, through you, it is generally one complaint per person. Occasionally a complainant might write a couple of times a year, but generally it's one complaint, one person.
And same with the compliments?
Generally yes. At times the compliments might be from multiple people for a single project, but they are generally from multiple people, individuals.
Thank you.
The question was there. So does this include complaints against elected members or compliments?
We have our own complaint line.
To be honest, I have never received a compliment about an elected member. That may be that the channels don't end with me. So my charter is against the customer service charter, generally related to staff.
Yep, thank you. I think we can lift our game. If we knew that we could lift our game, then maybe that's a good thing. I'm really pleased to see that city planning, which has received the highest number of complaints. I'm not so keen on that, but just that concept that there's the concierge and also there's been improvements to the webpage as well.
Yes, if I may add through you, Chair, that has been probably one of the best things that we've seen through the highlighting of the complaints register and bringing it up to the fore. We've had the data to actually recognise what the complaints are about, and then we can address them. So, as Mr Jackson said, it is about highlighting and finding where the issues are so that we can address them.
Yeah, I think I might have misheard you, Deputy Lord Mayor. I think you said that city planning had the most complaints. That's not quite correct in terms of the total number.
Through you, Chair, it's the highest number of process complaints.
Process.
Process complaints, which make up 29%. The process complaints 29% of the overall complaints.
As a comment, that is a compliment, really, because your processing levels are very high.
Thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, Mr. Noy.
Any further discussion?
No, happy to move.
Happy to move. All those in favour? No. Any against? No. Items carried. Committee action status report. Director?
Chair, through you, I don't think there's any significant movement on this. There are a number of significant items on this that are being worked through. You'll see at the end there's a number of actions that are in shade that they will now be closed off because they're regarded as complete. But no other particular comment, Chair.
Move that we received and noted.
All those in favour? Aye. Yes. No. Items carried. Next one's response to questions about notice. I'll just remind everyone, questions about notice, these are just to be received and noted, not to be debated.
Move them.
We have a mover, Councillor Harvey.
I have been requested to put in a response to particular questions on notice or answers to questions on notice by Alderman Zuko. I can do it by reading it. I understand I'm required to read it.
As a question without notice? Or?
It's a question without notice, I suspect. Did you see it as a question without notice, Mr Jackson?
That was through you, Chair. That was my understanding. It's probably one for the next item.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Just a new question, I guess.
All right.
Okay, so at the moment the question before the committee is that the responses to questions about notice be received and noted. We have a mover, Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? No. Items carried. So the next one is question without notice.
All right. So I will read, best I can, I'll read what's involved here. As per, this came from Alderman Zuko, and I'll simply ask for Mr Jackson to read it into the minutes of this meeting. As per response to my question, I respond as follows and ask further questions as follows. Question 1 has not been adequately addressed. In particular, the question was, who sought the implementation of an electric car charging facility on the elected members' parking deck? The answer provided is a more general response as per vehicle charges in HCC car parks. I am not aware that elected members' car park was part of the vehicle charges in parking infrastructure. It has been brought to my attention that the charger installed on the elected members' car park was by a direct email, that's in inverted commas, to an HCC employee to, quote, make it happen, end of quote. I ask the question again. Was the charger that was installed on the elected members' car park installed from a, quote, direct email?
Sorry, we were just to seek some advice, because we've already received a note of the answer. Are we able to...
This is a further question without notice.
But Chair, through you.
Just checking that
it's being asked in part 9 of the agenda, and it's being suggested it is a new question without notice.
Well, it's a question of an answer. Yeah.
I guess what I'm thinking, if I understand correctly, what Alderman Thomas is reading out. Alderman Zerko says he's asking the question again.
He's asking further questions.
Is it, so again, I'm hearing it for the first time, so it will come down to, is it actually a new question?
If you were to take it on notice, the response may well be this has already been answered.
That's right, and I will
Okay.
I can suggest you.
Okay, yep. Yeah, continue on, Tom. Sorry, I wish to just clarify that we're not. Yeah.
I ask the question again. Was the charger that was installed on the elected members' car park installed from a, quote, direct email request, end of quote, and who sought that the charger be installed? As per answer to question 3, again, the response does not adequately provide answers to the question, so I provide further questions to be answered. I ask the following questions. How many and which elected member or members have an electric vehicle imported from Japan? How many elected members have electric vehicles that use the elected members' car park for charging purposes? When was a quote, council, end of quote, decision made that, quote, members of the public, end of quote, would be able to use the elected members' car park for, quote, parking a vehicle charging purposes, end of quote. The above being the case, how was it ever intended to, quote, charge members of the public to use the elected members' car park for charging purposes without an appropriate report to council, in particular, that members of the public were to be provided use of the elected members' car park? Who initiated the car parks labelled Lord Mayor and Deputy Lord Mayor be painted over and deleted? When was this approved by the council? Was this requested by any elected members? I submit the questions.
Thank you, Alderman Thomas. Director?
Yeah, I will take those questions on notice.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Harvey?
The electric charger in the Alderman's councillor's car park is it also available for electric bicycles?
Director?
Unless we have a quick answer in the gallery, I will take that on notice. Take on notice? Yeah, we'll take that on notice. Thank you.
Any further questions? Deputy?
This is in relation to rates, not PowerPoints. The UTAS former Mid-City Hotel is again formerly hotel accommodation. Does that mean that that property is now rateable?
Through you, Chair, we're aware of that situation, and yes, we will be discussing with UTAS when that becomes effective to become a full paying rate property again.
Thank you.
Councillor Dura?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wanting to ask a question with regards to the questions we can ask in the meeting. Is it possible, or is there an option where a councillor can ask these questions directly from the offices instead of bringing it here?
Are you asking me as the chair? Asking me as my understanding, Councillor Dura, is that will.
Chair, through you, any elected member. Oh, we've lost Councillor Dutta.
Oh, no. Yep.
Any elected member can ask a question of the Chief Executive Officer or the directors at any stage. It is nevertheless allowable under the meeting regulations and the Local Government Act meeting procedures. Elected members can choose to ask their question without notice as part of any committee meeting or council.
Just confirming you heard that, Councillor Dutta?
Yeah, there's a lot of distortion. It's not coming out very clear. I'll speak to the director, Tim Short, some other time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the floor? No. I have one. Director, this morning I received an email of a broadcast summary where it was mentioned that council made an error at a decision of council, or may have made an error at a decision of council last night. But my understanding is that when talking about decisions of council, it's not the role to reflect upon them and insinuate that they are errors. I was just wondering to what extent this applies when someone's giving an interview on behalf of the city, talking about decisions that were made at the council meetings.
I will take that on notice.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes.
Cool. No further questions. We'll move on to the closed portion of the meeting. Could I have a motion, please, that we close the open and open the closed? Deputy Mayor, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.